You got everything you wanted, the position, the recognition, the life that was supposed to feel like an arrival. And somewhere between building it and living in it, something went quiet inside you that hasn't come back. Maybe you haven't admitted that yet. Maybe you've been too busy protecting the sacrifice to look at what it cost you. Maybe the goal was always easier to carry than the question of why you needed it so badly in the first place. Every great dream asks for a price. That part is true and has always been true. The philosophers knew it. The ancients knew it. Every tradition that ever took ambition seriously understood that nothing of weight arrives without something being surrendered first. But there is a difference. And this is the thing almost no one tells you, between paying the price of greatness and selling yourself to appear great. One refines you, the other hollows you out. One asks you to give up what is comfortable, the other asks you to give up what is true. And the terrifying part is that from the outside, from every angle the world can see, they look exactly the same. The question this video is asking is not whether you are willing to pay the price. The question is whether you know what you are actually paying for. There is a man who has not eaten dinner with his family in 4 years. Not because he is absent. He is there, physically, at the table. But somewhere between the first course and the last, his phone appears, and the conversation he is half having with the people in front of him slowly loses to the one happening inside his head. The deal, the timeline, the thing he should have said in the meeting, the thing he needs to say tomorrow. His children have learned not to compete with it. His wife stopped trying to name it, and he tells himself, if he tells himself anything at all, that this is temporary, that when the thing is built, when the number is reached, when the position is secured, he will return. He will come back to the table. He will be present again. He has been saying this for 4 years, and here is what he does not say out loud, because saying it would require looking at it directly. He no longer knows if he wants to come back. The table has started to feel like an interruption. The people who love him have started to feel like a demand he cannot meet. And somewhere in the machinery of all that building, the man who wanted to build something in the first place has become very difficult to locate. This is one version of the price. It is real and it is common, and almost no one names it while it is happening. But there is another version, quieter, harder to see. There is a woman who achieved exactly what she set out to achieve. The recognition came, the respect came, and she noticed in the weeks after it arrived that what she felt most was not satisfaction, but relief. Not the relief of completion, but the relief of proof. As if the achievement had not been about the work at all, but about silencing something, about finally having an answer to a question she had never spoken aloud, the question of whether she was enough. And the terrible thing about using achievement to answer that question is that the answer never holds. The silence lasts maybe a week. Then the question comes back, slightly louder, asking for more proof. This is the other version of the price, the one that looks identical to ambition from the outside and feels identical to ambition from the inside, but is paying something entirely different. Every serious tradition that has ever thought about human ambition, and there have been many across centuries and continents that never spoke to each other, arrived at a version of the same understanding, that the pursuit of something great will cost you, that it should cost you, that a dream which asks nothing of you is not yet a dream, only a preference. The Greeks had a word for the specific kind of destruction that comes from ambition without self-knowledge. They called it hubris. And it is worth pausing here because hubris is almost always mistranslated in the way we use it now. It is not arrogance in the ordinary sense. It is not pride exactly or vanity. Hubris in the older understanding describes what happens when a person begins to confuse their role with their identity. When the thing they are doing becomes the thing they believe they are. When the dream stops being something they carry and starts being the thing that carries them. The Greeks were not warning against ambition, they were warning against a particular kind of forgetting. The hero who falls in the ancient stories does not fall because he wanted too much. He falls because in wanting it, he lost track of who was wanting. Icarus did not die because he flew. He died because somewhere over the Aegean, he forgot he was a boy. That distinction between the cost that builds and the cost that erases is not a modern idea. It is not a therapeutic concept or a wellness reframe. It appears in Stoic philosophy, where Marcus Aurelius wrote, in private, for no audience, about the danger of becoming the role the world had given him. It appears in the alchemical tradition, not alchemy as failed chemistry, but alchemy as a symbolic language for inner transformation, a tradition that Carl Jung would spend decades interpreting as a map of the psyche. It appears in different forms across traditions that share no common origin but arrive at the same edge, that there are two kinds of sacrifice. One is the price of becoming. The other is the price of disappearing. Most people who are deep in the pursuit of something cannot tell which one they are paying, not because they are not intelligent, but because both of them feel, from the inside, exactly like dedication. That is the problem this video is trying to name. There is a difference between wanting to build something and needing to prove something. From the outside, they are indistinguishable. The hours are the same. The sacrifice is the same. The language used to describe them is often identical. Dedication, discipline, vision, drive. But inside the person doing the work, the engine running the whole thing is pointed in entirely different directions. One is oriented toward something. The other is oriented away from something. Carl Jung spent the better part of his life trying to understand why intelligent, capable people sometimes destroyed themselves in the pursuit of their own ambitions. Not through laziness or failure, but through success. Through the relentless accumulation of exactly what they said they wanted. He was not interested in people who gave up. He was interested in people who won, and found that winning had cost them something they could not name and could not get back. What he identified, and this is worth sitting with because it does not appear in most conversations about ambition, is that the human psyche has a way of disguising its wounds as callings. That the thing a person feels most driven toward is not always the thing their deepest self is trying to express. Sometimes it is the thing their wounded self is trying to repair. And those two pursuits, the expression and the repair, can look completely identical from the outside. They can even feel identical from the inside, for years, sometimes for decades, before the difference becomes impossible to ignore. Jung called one version of this inflation. Not inflation in the economic sense, but in the psychological one. Ego inflation, in his framework, describes what happens when the ego, the conscious self, the part of you that navigates the world, and makes decisions and tells the story of who you are, becomes identified with something larger than itself, with a role, with a mission, with a dream. The ego stops being the person who has the dream and starts being the dream itself. And when that happens, something quietly breaks in the architecture of the self. The inflated ego is not necessarily arrogant in the way we usually mean. It does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it is the person who works in complete silence, who asks for nothing, who sacrifices everything and tells no one, but who has organized their entire inner world around the idea that they are someone with a special destiny, that the suffering is meaningful because they are meaningful, that the cost is justified because what is being built is justified. And underneath all of that, running quieter than thought, is the original wound, the one that started this, the one the dream was supposed to fix. This is what the ancient Greeks were pointing at with hubris. Not vanity, not loud self-promotion. The particular blindness that comes from needing the dream to mean something about you. Think of someone you know, or perhaps recognize, who is not exactly chasing success. They are chasing a specific audience for their success, the people who doubted them, the parent who was never satisfied, the city that did not notice them, the ex who left. Everything they build is, in some structural way, a message addressed to someone who may never read it. The achievement is real, the work is real, but the engine underneath it is not creation. It is reply. Jung would say that this person is not living their dream. They are living their wound's dream. And the wound, unlike the self, is never satisfied because it does not want to arrive anywhere. It wants to keep being wounded because that is the only story it knows how to tell. This is the mechanism that most conversations about ambition never quite name. They talk about the price of the dream. They do not talk about whose dream it actually is. And that question, whose dream is this really, is the one that changes everything. Because if you are paying the price of your own dream, the cost has a direction. It is building something inside you even as it takes things away. The sacrifice has weight, but it also has meaning that you can feel, not just narrate. But if you are paying the price of your wound's dream, the cost has no floor. There is no amount of achievement that closes the account, no arrival that finally feels like arrival. The price keeps rising because the wound keeps moving the finish line, and you keep running and calling it ambition and wondering, in the quiet moments you allow yourself, why it never feels like enough. The story of Icarus is usually told as a warning about ambition. A boy is given wings made of feathers and wax. His father, Daedalus, the craftsman, the architect, the man who built the labyrinth that imprisoned the Minotaur, warns him before they take flight. Do not go too low, where the sea will dampen the wings and weigh them down. Do not go too high, where the sun will melt the wax and the feathers will come apart. Stay in the middle. Fly at the right height. Icarus flies too high. The wax melts. He falls into the sea and drowns. Most people stop the story there. They take from it a simple lesson about knowing your limits, about the dangers of overreaching, about the hubris of wanting more than you were made for. It becomes a cautionary tale about ambition itself. Don't fly too close to the sun. Don't want too much. Don't forget your place. But this reading misses the most important detail in the myth. And that detail is not what Icarus wanted. It is what he forgot. Daedalus did not warn his son against flying. He warned him against flying badly. The instruction was not stay on the ground. It was stay in the middle. The dream was never the problem. The wings were real. The escape was possible. Daedalus himself made it across. The craft worked. What failed was not the ambition. What failed was the boy's relationship to himself while the ambition was in motion. Because somewhere over the Aegean, with the wind under him and the world below him, and the horizon opening in every direction, Icarus stopped being a boy with wings and became, in his own mind, something else entirely. Something that belonged to the sky, something that the sun could not touch. The warning his father had given him, that warning existed for a human being. And in that moment, Icarus no longer felt like a human being. He felt like the flight itself. This is the mechanism Jung was trying to describe with inflation, not the desire to fly, the forgetting, mid-flight, that you are the one doing it. There is a point in the pursuit of any serious dream where this becomes possible, where the momentum of the thing, the identity it has given you, the way other people now see you and the way you have begun to see yourself, where all of that accumulates into something that starts to feel more real than you are. The dream becomes load-bearing. The dream becomes the structure you live inside, and the person who started it, the one who had the original hunger, the one who knew why, that person starts to recede, quietly, without announcement, the way a room empties when no one is paying attention. This is not a dramatic collapse. It rarely announces itself. It happens in small surrenders. The conversation you do not have because the project matters more. The doubt you do not allow yourself to feel because the vision requires certainty. The friend you stop calling because they knew you before, and the person you were before no longer fits the story. Each of these alone is nothing. Together over time, they are the slow replacement of a person with a role. And the role is very convincing. The role has answers. The role has direction. The role knows exactly what the next step is and why it matters. The person underneath the role, the one with the original wound, the one with the question that started all of this, that person has not been consulted in a very long time. What Daedalus understood, and what Icarus forgot, is that the wings were a tool, a magnificent tool, a tool that could carry a person across the sea and toward something genuinely new, but a tool nonetheless. Something you use, not something you become. The ancient world was full of this distinction. It appears in different forms across traditions that had no contact with each other. The Stoic insistence on separating what you do from what you are. The alchemical image of the prima materia, the raw and formless self that must be transformed without being destroyed. The various Eastern frameworks that distinguish between the person who acts and the action itself. The language changes. The geography changes. But the warning is always the same. You can pursue the dream. You must pursue the dream if it is real. But you cannot become it. The moment you become it, you have not gained the dream. You have lost yourself to it. And a dream that has consumed its dreamer has not been achieved. It has simply found a new host. The question the myth is really asking, the question underneath the feathers and the wax and the drowning boy, is this: at what point did Icarus stop flying toward something and start flying to feel like something? And could he have known in the moment that the shift had happened? The right dream will cost you your comfort. The wrong dream will cost you yourself. This is the distinction that most conversations about ambition collapse. They speak about sacrifice as if it were a single thing. As if giving up sleep and giving up integrity belong to the same category of loss, differing only in degree. But they do not. They are not the same category. They are not even close. There are things you can surrender on the way to something real and still arrive whole. Comfort is one of them. Security is one of them. The approval of people who do not understand what you are doing, that too. The version of yourself that required certainty before moving. The habits that belonged to a smaller life. The relationships that could only survive if you stayed exactly as you were. These are genuine costs. They are not trivial. Anyone who has paid them knows they leave marks. But they are costs that have a return. Something is built in the place of what was given up. The person who comes out the other side is not diminished. They are, in some way that is difficult to articulate but impossible to miss, more themselves than before. This is the price of becoming. Then there is the other kind of sacrifice, the kind that does not build anything in the place of what it takes. The email you send that you know is a lie, but the deal requires it. The person you leave behind, not because the relationship had run its course, but because they remembered who you were before the dream took over, and that memory had become inconvenient. The version of yourself that would have said no, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, some quiet knowledge of what you could and could not live with. That version is slowly, methodically, quietly retired. Not because the dream demanded it, because the wound demanded it. And you called it discipline. This is the price of disappearing. The difference is not always visible from the outside. Both involve real sacrifice. Both involve real cost. Both can produce real results in the world, the company, the recognition, the achievement that others point to. But one of them leaves you more intact at the end than you were at the beginning. The other leaves you less. One of them, if you were honest with yourself in the quiet moments, you could defend, not to other people, to yourself. You could look at what you gave up and say, yes, that was mine to give. I chose that. I would choose it again. The other kind, you cannot defend that way. You can rationalize it. You can construct arguments for it, and the arguments will be intelligent, and the logic will hold. But somewhere beneath the logic, in the place that does not respond to argument, you know. You knew at the time. There was a moment, and there is always a moment, when you felt the choice land in your body as a kind of smallness, a contraction, the sensation of something leaving that did not want to go. Most people in that moment override the sensation. They call it weakness. They call it sentimentality. They call it the kind of thinking that keeps ordinary people ordinary. And they move forward. And the dream moves forward with them. Larger now, hungrier now. Having learned that this person will pay that price, it begins to ask for more. Jung wrote about this as a kind of possession. Not in a supernatural sense, but in a precise psychological one. When the ego has become so identified with a goal, a role, a vision, that it can no longer distinguish between what the self wants and what the dream demands, the person has, in a functional sense, been replaced. They are still present. They still make decisions, hold conversations, pursue objectives, but the organizing principle of their inner life is no longer them. It is the dream. And the dream, unlike the self, has no conscience. It does not care what it costs. It only moves forward. This is the dark price the title of this video is pointing at. Not the sacrifice that hurts, the sacrifice that hollows, not the cost that leaves marks, the cost that leaves absence. The right dream will cost you your comfort. The wrong dream, or rather the right dream pursued from the wrong place, will cost you the one thing no achievement can simply give back to you: yourself. And the terrifying thing, the thing that makes this so difficult to sit with, is that you will not always know which one you are paying until you have already paid it. But there are signs. There are small warnings before the collapse. And most of them do not sound like danger at first. They sound like dedication. The first sign is not dramatic. It is the moment when someone asks you how you are doing. A friend, a partner, someone who has known you long enough to mean the question. And you realize you do not know how to answer it. Not because the question is complicated, because you have not thought about it in a very long time. You have been thinking about the project, the target, the next step, the gap between where you are and where the vision requires you to be. You have been inside the dream so completely that the person living it has become almost beside the point. You say you are fine, you say you are busy, and both of those things are true and neither of them is an answer. This is the first sign. Not burnout, not breakdown. Just the quiet discovery that you have become a stranger to yourself, that the inner life, the one that used to have opinions about things unrelated to the work, that used to feel moved by things that did not advance the goal, that used to rest without guilt, has gone somewhere you cannot immediately locate. The second sign is harder to name because it presents itself as strength. It is the moment when you stop being able to hear certain things, when feedback that touches the dream produces not reflection, but defense. When doubt, your own doubt, the kind that used to function as a compass, starts to feel like an enemy rather than information. When the people who love you most say something careful and true, and you feel before you even process the words a kind of irritation, because they do not understand, because they are not inside it the way you are, because their concern, however well meant, is friction against the momentum. In Jungian terms, this is where the reflective function of consciousness begins to fail. The capacity to step back from your own experience and ask, is this what I actually think? Or is this what the dream needs me to think? When that capacity goes quiet, the person is no longer driving. They are being driven. And the thing driving them will not stop simply because it has started to hurt. The third sign is the one that arrives last, and the one that is most difficult to admit. It is the moment when you achieve something significant, something you worked for, something real, something that required real sacrifice, and the feeling that arrives is not what you expected. There is relief, perhaps. There is a brief stillness, and then, almost immediately, a restlessness, a reaching for the next thing. Not because you are ambitious, because the silence that would come if you stopped is the silence you have been running from the entire time. And in that silence lives the question you have not allowed yourself to answer, the one about whether any of this was really yours, whether the hunger was ever about what you said it was about. You recognize this sign not by its loudness, but by its timing. It arrives at the exact moment when, by any reasonable measure, you should feel something. And you feel almost nothing. Or you feel the wrong thing, the relief of proof rather than the warmth of arrival. the sense not of having built something, but of having temporarily quieted something. And in that stillness, that it will ask again. These signs do not mean the dream is wrong. They do not mean you should stop. They do not mean the sacrifice was wasted or the work was hollow. What they mean, and this is the only thing they mean, is that somewhere in the pursuit, a drift occurred, a small, almost imperceptible drift, from expressing yourself toward proving yourself, from building something toward becoming something, from the self that chose the dream, toward the dream that consumed the self. And the reason this matters is not moral, it is practical. A person who is building from wholeness can absorb failure. They can rest. They can change direction when the evidence demands it, because their identity is not riding on any single outcome. The dream belongs to them. They belong to themselves. A person who is building from a wound cannot absorb any of those things. Failure is not information, it is annihilation. Rest is not recovery, it is proof of inadequacy. And a change of direction is not wisdom. It is betrayal of the only story that has been holding them together. So the signs are not warnings to give up. They are invitations to look, to ask, with as much honesty as the moment allows. Whose voice started this? What was it trying to say? And is the thing I am building still in service of that voice? Or has it quietly become something else? Because the way back does not begin by abandoning the dream. It begins by finding the dreamer again. There is a concept in Jung's work that almost never appears in conversations about ambition. He called it individuation. It is not a self-help term. It is not a framework for becoming your best self, or a technique for unlocking potential, or a map for achieving goals. Jung was not interested in any of those things. What he was interested in was something older and harder and more precise, the process by which a person becomes, over the course of a lifetime, fully and specifically themselves. Not a better version of someone else, not the person their wound needed them to be, not the role the world had assigned them, or the dream that had been running them. Themselves, the actual, particular, irreducible self that was present before the wound, before the dream, before the construction of the identity that now stands in their place. Individuation is not comfortable. Jung was clear about this. It requires exactly the kind of looking that the inflated ego will do almost anything to avoid. It requires sitting with the question of whose voice started this and tolerating the answer, even when the answer is not the one you were hoping for. It requires distinguishing between what you built and what was built through you, between what you chose and what you were chosen by, between the dream that expressed you and the dream that replaced you. This is the only price, Jung seemed to suggest, that actually pays something back. Every other sacrifice, the comfort, the security, the approval, the sleep, the ordinary pleasures of an ordinary life, those can be paid and repaid and paid again. And if they are paid in service of the real self, they will cost you something and give you something back. But if they are paid in service of the wound's dream, they will only cost. There is no return. There is only the next demand. The price of individuation is different. It costs you the story you have been telling about yourself. The one where the suffering was proof of your specialness, and the sacrifice was evidence of your destiny. And the people who did not understand were simply not capable of seeing what you could see. It costs you the inflation. The sense of being someone for whom the ordinary rules do not apply. The conviction that the dream justifies everything it has asked for. That is a real cost. It is not a small one. The story you have been living inside is not nothing. It has organized your days, given your pain a frame, provided a reason for every difficult thing you have done or endured. Losing it is deeply disorienting. And for a time without it, the question of who you are without the dream feels unanswerable. But that disorientation, that particular emptiness, is not the end of something. Jung would say it is the beginning. It is the first moment of actual contact with the self that was there before the wound decided what you needed to prove. And from that place, something becomes possible that was not possible before. A dream that belongs to you. Not a dream that is running you. Not a dream born from the need to silence something, or prove something, or become something that compensates for something else. A dream that is simply an expression of what you are. That costs what it costs, asks what it asks, and gives back what it gives, without the wound moving the finish line every time you approach it. This is what it means to pay the right price. Not to sacrifice less, not to want less, not to lower the height of the dream out of some therapeutic caution about flying too close to the sun, to want from the right place. If you have recognized yourself in any part of this video, in the man at the table, in the woman measuring achievement against a silence that never quite fills, in the moment of contraction, in the restlessness that arrives where satisfaction should be, I want to ask you to stay with us at Myth and Mirror. Not because we have the answers, but because these are the questions worth asking together. Subscribe to this channel and join a conversation that does not settle for the surface of things. Now, back to where we were. Because finding the dreamer again is not a single moment. It is not a realization that arrives and resolves everything. It is a practice. The slow, unglamorous, daily work of asking the question that the inflated ego most wants to avoid. Not, am I succeeding? But, is this still mine? And behind that question, a deeper one, the one that individuation eventually leads every person toward, whether they are ready for it or not. Who would I be? And what would I build if I were no longer trying to prove anything to anyone, including myself? That question does not destroy ambition. It purifies it. And what comes through that purification is not smaller than what went in. It is truer. Go back to the beginning. The man who arrived, who has everything he said he wanted. The name, the position, the life that was supposed to feel like completion. Who sits at the table he built and feels, in the quiet beneath the achievement, something he cannot quite name. We started there because that image is not a warning. It is a question. Not, was it worth it? That question leads nowhere useful. The cost has already been paid. The years are not coming back. The relationships that were held at a distance, the versions of the self that were quietly retired, the moments of contraction that were overridden and called discipline, those are done. The question of whether it was worth it is the wrong question, because it asks you to stand outside your life and evaluate it as if you were someone else, as if you could have known then what you know now, as if regret were the only thing left. The right question is simpler and harder. What is left? Not what did you build, not what do others see when they look at what you have made, not the external measure of the thing, the recognition, the position, the name. What is left of you? The part that existed before the dream found you. The part that was not defined by the goal, not shaped by the need to prove something, not held together by the story of someone on the way to becoming something. The part that could sit at a table without an agenda and simply be in the room. The part that could hear a question about how you are doing and actually answer it. Is that part still there? For most people who have pursued something seriously, the answer is yes. Quieter than it used to be, harder to locate, covered perhaps by years of urgency and momentum and the particular numbness that comes from treating yourself as an instrument of the dream rather than its author. But present, underneath. Jung believed, and this was not optimism, it was observation, that the self does not disappear. It waits. It recedes when the ego inflates, when the wound takes over the controls, when the dream becomes the organizing principle of everything. But it does not leave. It is simply waiting for the question. The question that individuation asks, and that this video has been circling from the beginning, is not, should you have the dream? It is, are you the one dreaming it? Because greatness, real greatness, the kind that does not hollow the person who achieves it, is not the product of a wound that finally got loud enough. It is not the proof that the doubters were wrong, or the answer to a question that should have been outgrown years ago. It is not the thing you became in order to survive something. It is the thing that was already in you, before the wound, before the story, before the need to be anything other than what you were. And the dark price, the price this video has been about, is not the sacrifice the dream asks for. It is the distance between who you are and who is doing the asking. Pay attention to that distance, not to shrink the dream, to find the dreamer. There is something I want to ask of you before we close. If something in this conversation landed, if one of those images felt less like philosophy and more like recognition, if the question of whose dream this actually is has been sitting with you in a way you did not expect, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Not to convince them of anything. Not to start an argument about ambition or sacrifice or what greatness costs, but because some questions are easier to carry when you are not the only one asking them. And leave a comment, not a summary of what you thought, something true, something that does not fit neatly into a lesson. Tell me what you recognized. Tell me what you are still sitting with. Tell me what question you would want this channel to follow next. Because the conversation this video is part of is not finished. It has barely started. The dark price of greatness is real, and it is paid every day by people who are building things and proving things and running from things, and occasionally, in the quiet moments they allow themselves, wondering if they have confused the two. This channel exists for those moments. And if you are still here at the end of this, then you already know something about yourself that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. You are willing to ask. That, more than anything else, is where the real work begins.